Every now and then, a royal commentator says something so confidently wrong that it forces us to revisit history, not to rewrite it, but to rescue it from being turned into propaganda. That's exactly what happened when a familiar GB News voice decided to offer the public a so-called uplifting lesson from royal history, suggesting that anyone feeling low should simply think of Princess Margaret and smile. Why? Because she stayed. Because she didn't leave when things became unbearable. And because of that, we were told, she was invaluable to her sister and to the monarchy, unlike Prince Harry. Now pause for a moment, because this idea only works if we collectively ignore what Princess Margaret's life actually looked like. When people think of her story, joy is not the dominant emotion. Her legacy is not one of fulfillment or emotional peace. It is the story of a woman shaped, restricted, and ultimately worn down by an institution that demanded sacrifice first and asked questions never. Yet somehow that suffering is now being sold as something inspirational. Let's be very clear about what is being praised. Princess Margaret was prevented from marrying the man she loved because he was divorced. At just 25 years old, she was forced into a brutal choice between personal happiness and institutional duty. She chose duty. She later married someone else, not because the match fulfilled her emotionally, but because it looked acceptable. That marriage collapsed in full public view, and what followed was not serenity or purpose, but decades of frustration, resentment, and quiet rebellion. And this, we're told, is the moral high ground. This is the example we should admire. Unsurprisingly, many people were unconvinced. The reaction online was confusion, mixed with disbelief. People struggled to understand how a life marked by heartbreak, addiction, isolation, declining health, and public humiliation was being repackaged as a feel-good story about loyalty. Princess Margaret's life did not end in triumph. It ended in decline, years of heavy drinking, chain smoking, repeated health crises, loss of mobility, and an early death that came before both her mother and her sister. Calling her invaluable begins to sound less like praise and more like branding something painful as precious simply because it endured. Technically important, emotionally devastating, expensive to maintain, and best hidden away so no one has to confront what it really represents. And this framing isn't accidental. It fits into a long-established royal pattern, especially when it comes to spares. The monarchy has never treated spares well. Princess Margaret wasn't an exception, she was the prototype. Margaret stayed, she complied. She sacrificed love, independence, and personal happiness. And what did staying actually give her? A life spent dulling emotional pain through excess, acting out through scandal, and escaping reality whenever possible, because the palace felt less like a home and more like a prison. She never left the institution, but she never truly lived freely within it either. Then there is Prince Andrew. If loyalty is defined purely as not leaving, then Andrew qualifies without question. He stayed exactly where he was while cultivating relationships that embarrassed the monarchy, attracting international scrutiny and dragging the institution into repeated controversy. His record includes deeply troubling associations, disastrous interviews, financial impropriety, and connections that raise serious concerns. In any normal workplace, that behaviour would result in immediate dismissal. Within the royal system, however, Andrew was quietly managed, shielded, repositioned and hidden. Because he stayed, and staying, apparently, is what matters most. Even after being stripped of titles and patronages, even after settling a civil case for millions, Andrew continues to live in royal housing, receive family support, and appear at private family events. Staying covers a multitude of sins. Now compare that with Prince Harry, who is often labelled the real problem. What did Harry actually do? He married a woman he loved. He refused to let painful history repeat itself. He removed his family from an environment he believed was unsafe. He chose therapy over self-destruction. He chose honesty over silence. He chose work over entitlement. And somehow those choices are treated as betrayal. Princess Margaret is praised because she didn't walk away, even though she spent decades signalling how unhappy she was. Her rebellion happened internally through affairs, feuds, excess, and increasingly erratic behaviour. Her famous love story wasn't just tragic, it was instructive. She was told she could have love or status, but never both. She chose the crown, and what followed was resentment, not fulfillment. Her marriage collapsed under the weight of infidelity. Her private life became tabloid fodder. Her coping mechanisms grew more destructive. This was not a woman thriving because she stayed. This was a woman slowly unravelling because she wasn't allowed to leave. Yet royal mythology performs its usual magic. Pain becomes devotion. Escape becomes glamour. Addiction becomes eccentricity. Anger becomes personality. Suffering becomes proof of loyalty. Andrew fits the same pattern. He didn't leave. He misbehaved while staying. From the monarchy's perspective, that's manageable. Internal problems can be controlled. Silence can be enforced. Access can be restricted. Harry broke the rule entirely. He removed himself from the system. And that is why he is treated as the greater threat. Harry didn't collapse. He didn't spiral publicly. He didn't spend decades being quietly managed behind palace walls. He didn't exist to make his brother look better by comparison. Princess Margaret made the Queen look saintly. Andrew makes Charles look functional. But Harry makes William look uncomfortable. Why? Because Harry works. Harry is likeable. Harry has built a life that doesn't depend on deference or public funding. And most unsettling of all, he appears genuinely happy. That is the real offence. The institution can tolerate scandal. It can tolerate disgrace. It can tolerate behaviour that would destroy careers anywhere else. What it cannot tolerate is someone leaving and thriving. Someone proving that life outside the gilded cage isn't just possible, it may actually be healthier. That is the existential threat. The monarchy relies on contrast. It needs troubled spares to elevate heirs. It needs tragedy to justify hierarchy. It needs people who stay and suffer so endurance can be sold as virtue. Harry refused that role. He didn't numb himself into silence. He didn't quietly decay for the sake of appearances. He didn't accept being sacrificed for optics. He walked away, and by doing so, he exposed something deeply uncomfortable. Survival outside the firm is not only possible, it may actually be preferable. That's why some commentators cling so tightly to the Princess Margaret narrative. Because if staying equals nobility, then leaving must equal weakness. The alternative is destabilizing. If Harry leaving was an act of strength, then Margaret's suffering becomes harder to romanticize. Andrew's indulgence becomes harder to excuse. And the institution itself starts to look less like a noble calling and more like a machine that consumes people. Princess Margaret's life is not a smile-inducing morality tale. It is a warning about what happens when duty outweighs well-being, when loyalty is measured by endurance rather than integrity. Harry didn't fail the monarchy. The monarchy failed him just as it failed Margaret and continues to shield Andrew. The difference is that Harry refused to become collateral damage. And for that he will never be forgiven by those who confuse suffering with virtue. Because sometimes the bravest thing a spare can do is walk away and live. And that's the truth many people don't want to sit with. Staying isn't always strength, and leaving isn't always failure. Sometimes walking away is the only way to survive with your integrity intact. Prince Harry didn't abandon duty, he chose life over slow destruction. And history will be far kinder to that choice than today's commentators ever will. If you found this perspective thought-provoking, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.